What is going on, everybody? For a long time, I didn't like doing videos where I was at my desk at my computer because the sound quality wasn't that great. But now that I've got this mic that I've actually had for 6 months and finally got around to putting together and getting it set up, and my sound quality is better, I think I'm going to start recording more videos here. Um, I don't know. We'll see how this goes. But what I want to do today is um, there's all this question swirling about SGC, right? Is SGC going to stick around? Will they be folded into the PSA brand? Well, what's going to happen with SGC? And a lot of people have been reaching out to me and asking, if I've got a card to grade, is it still safe to grade with SGC, or will SGC values plummet if the brand ceases to exist? Now, none of us know. None of us know, but what I started thinking was, well, what I like to do is about every 6 months, I like to check in on values of comparing SGC values to PSA values of cards in the same grade. It's such a difficult thing. There are three things that are uh, always in play in this lifetime that we have. Right? We have death, we have taxes, and we have people getting upset whenever there is a video that could be construed as something anti SGC or anti PSA. People are very protective of their grading companies. So, regardless of whether you're a PSA person or an SGC person, I have no doubt that what I'm about to share is going to upset some of you, probably all of you, because people just find ways to get defensive when talking about grading companies. Now, a lot of us in the hobby say we don't really care about values. And if people want to say that, that's fine. I think most people have some interest in the values because you're spending a lot of money, and you want to make sure that what you're buying isn't worthless or going to become worthless. And certainly SGC slabbed items are not going to become worthless if the SGC brand goes away, but the values could potentially change. And I talked about this a little bit a couple of days ago on my Wednesday Q&A episode. But I was thinking, a lot over the last 2, 3, 4, 5 months is when a lot of the SGC speculation has been coming out. A lot of this, are they going to be around because all of a sudden their wait times increased and Peters disappeared, and blah 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 blah. We've all heard it. I talked about this again on Wednesday a little bit, and I was like, I wonder what has been happening over the last 6 months with values comparing PSA and SGC, since more speculation has been popping up about SGC's future. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some data that I pulled, and I'm going to share it. And this is probably a little bit more of a visual video. A lot of my videos that I do, you don't necessarily have to be watching, but this one would be a little bit more helpful if you were watching, because there's a lot of visual stuff to look at as we're talking. But nonetheless, I'll do my best to describe it as I go. So I'm going to pull up on my screen here. How has recent SGC news potentially affected values? Okay. So let's take a look over here first. This is a look at the data that I shared in February of 2025. And what I did was I looked at the change in values from 23 to 24, and then the change in values from 24 to 25. And what I tended to see, if you look over here, is I tended to see a lot of things were trending toward SGC's favor. For example, this 58 Topps Willie Mays, a PSA 5 versus an SGC 5, there was a huge gap in values, average values in 2024 from 2023. and same with the PSA 6. But then a year later, you can see here that the values were starting to narrow. Now, the low grade in this example started to widen. Now, PSA has had a lead and does have a lead for this particular card, but it seems as if the lead was shrinking. So that was sort of one of my takeaways. Let's look at another example from that. So if we look here, the 56 Topps Jackie Robinson, a PSA 5 versus an SGC 5 at the end of 2024. There was a 17.5% difference between the two in the same grade. And then a sixth grade was a 15% difference. You fast forward a year later, so this would be about 6 months ago, and the PSA lead has shrunk to 6% in a 5, and SGC took the lead in the 6. So SGC again was closing the gap. That's again, these are slides from a video that I did in February. And then we have another one here, the 54 Topps Alkaline. The gap was 27% in a 5. And a year later, SGC's value was ahead by 15%. PSA 6 versus SGC 6 in 2024 was a 19% gap. SGC was ahead by 13%. So again, everything in these grades is trending. It's trending toward SGC. The lower grades tended to be trending towards PSA, which was a little bit counterintuitive of what I was used to historically. So that's sort of the premise. The premise was things have been getting more SGC friendly over the last year than PSA. And so my question is that going to continue here over the last 6 months, or is some of the questions that are arising about SGC going to affect the values? So I picked 10 cards, and the first card that I picked was the 1950 Bowman Jackie Robinson. So what I wanted to do for a comparison, because a lot of people go, Greg, your averages don't matter. It doesn't matter what an average is. You have to compare the cards. So all of the cards that I'm going to show you, I'm going to go through 10 cards from 10 different years from 1950 to 1959. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you two cards. I'm going to say pretty similar cards, right? Which one would you rather have? Might rather have this one by a little bit or this one by a little bit. And then we'll see what the prices of the sales were. And then we'll take a look at is maybe it because of the holder it's in. So when I look at these two particular cards, the centering on the card on the right is certainly better. The color seems a little bit deeper on the left. There's a little mark right here at the top left border of the one on the right. So some people would rather have the one on the left. Some people would rather have the one on the right. For me, it's kind of a toss-up. So again, these cards are the same grade. One is an SGC graded card. One is a PSA graded card. Same grade. So which one of these do you think sold for more? The one on the right or the one on the left? So that's the first question. Well, a lot of people in the past, when I've done these comparisons, say we can't tell without looking at the back. Okay, so here are the backs. Again, very similar backs. I'd say the corners on the one on the left are a little bit better than the one on the right. Centering, though, is certainly better on the one on the right. Again, some people would rather have the one on the left. Some people would rather have the one on the right. I'm kind of a toss-up. Again, that's why I chose this one, because it was kind of, I could make the argument either way. So which one is graded by which? Well, again, they're the same grade. The one on the right is a PSA 2.5. The one on the left is an SGC 2.5. So, which one do you think sold for more? Think the card on the right sold for more, or the card on the left sold for more? Now that we know the holders, does that affect it? Again, when we just looked at the cards, we took the holder away, like you see right now. If you're a centering only person, if centering is number one by far, then I think the card on the right is probably the one that you choose. If you are color, if you are corners, you'd probably rather have the one on the left. Both are, I think, pretty nice 2.5s. So, how do you think the sales went? Well, the SGC copy sold for a lot more. The SGC copy sold for, what is that, $419 more than the PSA copy. Same grade. So the one on the right's better centered, but the one on the left has better corners, has better color, it appears. And it sold for $419 more. So let's go and look at that. So for the first card, the 1950 Bowman Jackie Robinson, SGC sold for more. It sold for $419 more, which is 20% more than the PSA copy. Again, I think the cards are kind of a wash. If I were at a table and those were the two, I might barely prefer the one on the left for me, but not a lot more. Now, another thing that I did is I looked at the VCP, and we're going to talk about VCP here in a second. I looked at the VCP average sales. So I showed the last 4 or 5, depending on the card. I showed the last 4 or 5 sales, and then I showed the average sales from VCP. So on the top up here, a PSA 2.5 average sale is $2,153, which is more than the one that the PSA one just sold for. And then on the bottom, we have the SGC 2.5, and that averages $1,862. So what we have is the PSA copy is selling on average for, what's that, 10, 15% more than the SGC one. So that makes me wonder, okay, well, the example we just looked at, the SGC one sold for more, but in this case, the average, according to VCP, it is selling for more. Now, to VCP, I have Card Ladder, and I have Market Movers, and I have VCP. I just got VCP. So I have all three now. Now, people ask me all the time, which one is the best? And I historically have said, well, it kind of depends on what do you want it for? Do you want it for checking prices? Do you want it for uploading your collection and tracking the values? Do you want it for looking at charts? I genuinely think VCP is better than both of those now. I before had just had Card Ladder, and I had Market Movers, and I was kind of like, well, for this, it's Card Ladder. For this, it's Market Movers. Again, I think both of those are fine. But then I have a lot of friends that have talked about VCP. And VCP averages. That's like what you hear the most. And I'm like, what's with this VCP? So I checked it out, and it's really good. And so why am I putting this promo code up here? Because I reached out to VCP and I said, hey, I've talked about on my channel, I've talked about Card Ladder. On my channel, I've talked about Market Movers. And I think both of them are good. I think VCP is really good. I think people, if they tried VCP, would probably want to switch to VCP. And I said, can you do something if I do a promo code? And they said, yeah. They said, what we'll do is 2 free weeks of VCP with your promo code. So they set up a promo code for us. Midlife cards, as you can see in bright yellow on the screen. I would encourage you to try VCP. Download it. It's got a great app. It's got a great website. We're going to take a look at it in a second. What I'm constantly trying to do is I'm constantly trying to advocate for us collectors and see what is a good tool, what is a bad tool. And then if it's a good tool, I suggest it and let you decide for yourself. Some of you might go, I think you're going to really like VCP. So again, you can try it for free for 14 days if you use the promo code midlife cards. I think that if you don't use the promo code, I think they'll let you try it for 7 days. But if you use this promo code, you get to try it for 2 full weeks. I think it's worth it, especially going into the national. If you don't have an app for card value pricing, for comping going into the national, at the very least, load this up a couple of weeks, 10 days, a week before the national, and use it for free at the national. Now, I know people are going to say, well, what do I know about it? Greg, you haven't shared anything. So I'm pulling it up on the screen. Okay. So here is VCP. It's pretty simple. Now, in the drop down, you can have your collection where you upload your cards and what you bought them for and track their values if that's your thing. I haven't done that yet. I'm going to do that. I know a lot of my friends use that feature. A lot of my friends use that feature. But here's the search button, and this is where we're going to find stuff. So if I go to search, and it auto populates. So if I go 1960 tops Mickey, and it'll start to pull up what it thinks you want to find. And so, okay, the 1960 tops Mickey Mantle. It shows the card. It shows the total number of sales. And right up here, it shows the pop, right? And we can get more into that in a second. You can add it to your collection if you have one. You could add it to your want list if it's the card that you're thinking about. But let's look down here. So the sales data, first it has PSA. So these are the PSA averages. So let's just say you wanted this card in a 4. Okay, PSA 4. What does it comp at? Click on that, and it's got a chart that shows what it's been doing. You can change it to 5 years, 3 years, 1 year, 1 month, whatever it is that you want to look at it as. And then it has what the average sale price is and all of the sales. Now, a lot of them are going to be eBay, but it hits a lot of the auction sites too. Heritage, REA, keep scrolling down. So it shows you a bunch of recent sales so you can see what they've been selling for. Now, if you go, okay, well, that's great. That's PSA 4, but what is it in SGC for? Right here, you can click on the drop down, SGC 4. So SGC, now I select that grade 4, and it pulls up the SGC data. It's averaging 478.49. And then it says all of those recent sales. Again, lots of eBays, REA, Golden. So it pulls from all the auction sites, eBay, all of them. And it tells you what they've been selling for. And it gives you a chart. And you go, okay, well, that's what it's been doing over the last, month. What are about 3 months? It looks like it's slightly up. Over the last year, how's it doing? What's it doing over the last 5 years? What's it doing since, look at that. It goes all the way back to 2010. What's it been doing since 2010? What were they selling for then? I mean, it's very, very comprehensive. And then you can also go to the population. So you look at the universal pop. So that's all of the different holders, right? And then you got PSA. So in PSA 5s, 1859, 108 of them have qualifiers, 5.5s, 49. You go to SGC, it has them all. So you have the universal pop up at the top, and then you have PSA, you have SGC, you have BVG, BGF. It has all of them. It's a really great site. Again, now, should you get VCP if it works for you and it's something that you think adds value? What does it cost? Honestly, I don't remember. Like $15 a month, maybe. I spend so much time in this hobby that, I've got so many subscriptions that $15 is like nothing. And I don't even remember what that is, what the price was. I should have looked that up. I don't know what it is. Um, so anyway, that's VCP. I'll talk about that again at the end if you're interested, but I do think VCP is good. It does help me out a little bit if you end up subscribing, but no pressure. If you think that you want to try it for 2 weeks, absolutely try it for 2 weeks. Next card, 1951 Bowman Yogi Berra. Which of these two cards would you rather have? Now, we look at the centering. I think it's the one on the right. Color, maybe a little better left. Maybe. They're both pretty nice. Both pretty nice cards. I think if I have these two cards in front of me, I'm choosing the card on the right personally. I don't even remember which one is which. Look at the backs. Backs both look pretty clean. Nothing crazy on the back. So which one would you choose? Which one, again, these are the same grade. One's an SGC, one's a PSA. Which one do you think sold for more? Which card do you think sold for more? I would rather have the one on the right. The one on the right is an SGC holder. The one on the left is a PSA holder. Both received 3 grades. Now, which one do you think sold for more? Now, on the first card, remember, SGC sold for more. Which of these two cards do you think sold for more? I think the card on the right is better. So it seems like the card on the right should sell for more. It didn't. Both pretty close, though. $269 for the PSA 3, $255.26 for the SGC 3. Same shipping costs. Again, all of these are eBay sales. All of these are auctions. There are no buy it nows because a buy it now means one person was willing to pay that price. An auction means 2 people were willing to pay that price. So I think auction values are more accurate. So these are all auctions. These are all off of eBay. Okay, so in this one, in the 51 Bowman Yogi Berra, the PSA sold for more, $13.74 more, 5.4% more than the SGC counterpart, even though I think the SGC one was probably better. And some of you may disagree. That's fine. Again, I think kind of a coin flip. Almost all of these are going to be close to coin flips to try to find 2 cards that look very similar in each case. Now, here's an interesting fact, though. The PSA average is clearly higher, 20% higher. The PSA 3 averages about $300. The SGC 3 sells for $242 on average. Again, you can see the last 4 or so sales on the screen. So, again, if we go up to the first card, the Jackie is selling for about 15% more in a PSA holder than the SGC holder in the 2.5. The Yogi is selling for about 20% more on average. And this particular example, I think the PSA was not as good as the SGC, but it sold for more. My personal opinion. All right, let's keep looking. Here's a 52. Again, I'm doing 1950 to 1959. 52 tops, Bob Feller, 2 cards here. Which one would you rather have? Pretty similar. Sometimes we see these little lines here. That's actually on the image. They're actually on both. Centering is similar. There's a little tiny mark right on the edge here, maybe a little piece of paper pulp sort of thing. Pretty similar cards. I think I'd probably rather have the one on the left, barely. Again, honestly, I made this slideshow a few days ago, so I don't even remember which is which. I think I'd rather have the one on the left so far. Let's look at the back. Backs don't show anything crazy. Doesn't really change my mind on anything. Similar centering again. I think I'd rather have the one on the left. Looks like there's a little bit of a diamond cut on the one on the right, which is very, very common with 52 tops. And that one little mark, I think I'm leaning the card on the left. Card on the left is a PSA one. Again, similar cards. I do think the one on the left is probably a little bit better. Like, this is just my opinion. If you're yelling at the screen saying I'm wrong, that's okay. Again, I wanted to make it kind of difficult by finding two cards with the same grade. So the PSA copy sold for $157.50. The SGC copy sold for $122.50. Again, same grade. All the cards are going to be the same grade all the way through. Does that card deserve to sell for 20% more? The one on the left? Probably. Maybe. So the 52 tops Bob Feller, the PSA sold for more, $35 more, which equates to an extra 28.6% above the cost of the SGC one. So the PSA one costs 28.6% above the SGC one. That's quite a bit. So SGC was ahead on one, that bigger card, the Jackie. But then PSA is selling for more on the next two. All right, next car. Oh, no, let's look at the averages. This is interesting. Look at this. PSA 2 VCP average. VCP average, $144.75. SGC 2 average, $104. $40 more. That is a huge premium for the recent PSA sales over the SGC sales. That's a huge recent premium. And all of them, I mean, look, you got 180, 152, 168, 150. Those are the last four. But look at SGC, 122.50, 102.50, 87, 67.20. Every single one of the last four SGC sales is a lot less than the lowest of the last four PSA sales. That to me is concerning. That to me is starting to tell a story that with recent sales of things going on, that people are leaning PSA. Will that trend continue, or is it just this card? Let's keep watching. Let's keep looking. All right, 53 Bowman color, Mickey Mantle. Now the card on the left has a little bit of snow on it, and the card on the left is a little bit off center, top to bottom, left to right. They're both great. I think I'd rather have the card on the right here. Seems a little bit of a crisper image, and it doesn't have the snow. So I'm leaning a little bit to the card on the right in this example. Again, they're the same grade. Which one would you rather have? Looking at the backs, again, similar, very similar. Which one sold for more? Well, the one on the right was the PSA. The one on the left is the SGC. Now, in my personal opinion, the PSA card has looked a little bit better in three of the four. The SGC does not look as good as the PSA, in my opinion. So it would seem to me like the PSA one would sell for more here because it clearly seems like a better card. Also, not that old of a grade. It's got the serial number with a 7. So that was probably graded a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago. It sold for $1,775, while the SGC with the snow on it, $1,400. I would love to have either card. Let me just, I'm not trying to dog any cards here. Every card I'm going to show you today, I would like to have. But the one on the right, the PSA copy sold for an extra $375. I think it's worth an extra $375, which equates to an additional 26.8% above the cost of the SGC copy. So in my personal opinion, another thing we have to be considering, again, I know people are throwing rotten tomatoes if you are watching this because you're finding all sorts of issues with anything that I'm doing, but we have to find some way to look at this. Like we have to go, okay, what can we take away from the data, from the sales history? I do think in every case, the better card has sold for more. And of those first four, I do think that I do think that. I do think that the SGC card was the better card in the first one, and in the next three, I do think that the PSA card was better. So that means that people are buying the card, not the grade or the holder, I think. What about the averages? Okay, so the average is tight here. So PSA 3, $1,530. SGC 3, $1,500. Again, this is the averages. Let's look at the recent sales. So the recent sales on the PSA 3, 1,381, 1,903, 1,775. That's the one we just looked at. 1,485. If we look at the SGC, you have one outlier here, which is a best offer. That's interesting. So 1428, 1400, the one outlier that was the best offer, somebody paid up. Maybe it was I don't know. And then 1450. So the 1400 is the one that we just used in the example, the one we just saw. So on average, kind of feels like, other than this one, the PSA is getting a little bit of a premium. All right, let's look at the next card. 54 tops alkaline. I know I'm getting a little long-winded, but I'm doing my best here. Okay, card on the right, color is way better. You got a little bit of fuzz up here that you don't have on the one on the right. Centering's better on the right. Card on the right's better card, right? Everyone would rather have the card on the right, I think. Oh, there's a little dot right here. Other than that dot right there, I mean, I think 9 out of 10 people are taking the card on the right. Look at the back. Yeah, look at that top right-hand corner on the one on the left. I mean, the card on the right is the better card. It's not crazy better, but it's better. I mean, again, both are nice cards. I'd love to have either one of them. In fact, this is a card I'll be looking for at the National. It's definitely on my list. So what about the holders? Okay, both are 4.5s. And the SGC one is better. It's just better. It's a better card. Both are great, but the SGC is better. So if the trend continues, it seems like the SGC would sell for more, right? Not even close. Look at that. The PSA 4.5 sold for $850. The SGC 4.5 sold for $685. That is substantially less for a superior card. Now, the shipping cost was $5 on the SGC, and it was $16 on the PSA. So there's another $10 embedded in there. So that is a little interesting. That the better card is the SGC card, but the PSA card sold for substantially more. So in the fifth one, the SGC card was better. This is just my opinion, guys. But the PSA card sold for 24.1% above the cost of the SGC card. An extra $165. Would I like to add the PSA one to my collection? Yes. Would I like to add the SGC one to my collection? Yes. So they're both great cards, but the PSA one was better. There's no way that card should have sold for 24% more. I wouldn't think. So VCP averages, okay. PSA 4.5 is averaging 822. SGC is averaging 683. So it's very much in line with the comps. You look at the last few PSAs, $850, $1,440, $1,010, $1,050. So 3 of the 4 sold for over $1,000 in the PSA. Down below, the highest sale in the SGC was $1,000. So this again is this one's concerning for me as an SGC if you're an SGC person. I am at the point now where it doesn't matter to me if it's PSA or SGC, but I do want SGC to stick around. Why are the PSA copies selling for way more than the SGC copies. When even in like an example like this, the better card was the SGC copy. That's not a good thing to see if you are somebody who's rooting for SGC. Let's keep looking. How about a 55 tops Roberto Clemente rookie? Which of these would you rather have? Now, centering looks a little better on the top card. Color looks a little better on the bottom card. This corner, top left corner on the top card and bottom left corner on the top card are by far the two worst corners. So the better corners are the bottom. Better color is the bottom. Better centering, barely better on the top. So I would rather have the bottom card. Some of you are saying, nope, centering is more important. I get that. You might want the top card better. Let's look at the back. I'm not seeing anything crazy on the back. Again, the top is a little bit better centered on the back. Again, that corner, though, it's not a particularly good looking corner. So which one would you rather have? If I have these two cards in front of me, I'm taking the bottom card. The bottom card is the SGC card. Okay. Fairly recent grade for the PSA card, maybe like 3 or 4 years ago. It was graded based on that serial number and the flip and everything. So which one do you think sold for more? Think the PSA sold for more or the SGC sold for more? I think the SGC should sell for more. The PSA sold for quite a bit more. The PSA copy sold for an extra $350. Is the card on the top $350 better than the card on the bottom? I say no. So why did it sell for $350 more? Which again, $350, that's 15 to 20% more. Why would the card on the top sell for 15 to 20% more? Is it because it's in a PSA holder? So in this example, so for the 5th and 6th example, I believe the SGC card was superior, but the PSA card sold for more in both cases. 24% more for the K-line, 17% more for the Clemente. So selling for substantially more, even though they're the inferior cards, in my opinion. VCP average, okay, this is a little bit better news. It looks like the PSA average is about 2115 and the SGC average is 2050. If you look at the last few sales, though, again, this is a little concerning. The PSA recent sales are 2031, 1995, 2350, 2250. You look at the ones on the bottom for the SGC, 1800, 1725, and then 2235 and 2562. So the highest sale was an SGC sale, but the two lowest sales were SGC sales. Again, that for me is a little concerning. It's a little concerning that PSA is selling for that much more right now. All right. Next, 56 tops Willie Mays. Which of these two cards would you rather have? Centering on the top is better. Color is a little deeper on the top, but that could be the picture. I'm leaning toward the card on the top. There's a little bit of snow in his hat. See, it's kind of fuzzy on there. This doesn't seem to have it. I'm leaning card on the top. Better centering, similar corners. These are both really nice cards, actually. Let's look at the back. Anything crazy on the back? No, they both look pretty clean. Centering's a little bit better on the top again. I would pick the card on the top in this one. I don't think you're crazy if you pick the one on the bottom, but I do think the top's probably a little bit better of a card. Little bit. Again, they're all the same grade, so they should be pretty similar cards. Let's see how it went. Okay, so again, the card on the top is an SGC card. They're both 6 grades. I think those cards are very worthy of 6s, both of them. And that's a very recent sale. I'm sorry, a very recent serial number on the PSA. So this was graded within the last year, the one on the bottom. Some of you are saying, how do you know that? I've done videos on this. I could talk about it again in the not too distant future, but there are clues that you can tell it's not just the serial number. The flip, there are clues in the flip and the serial number that, when put together, you can get a pretty good idea of how recently something was graded. I like the card on the top better. I would think the card on the top would sell for more. Let's look. Wow. That's crazy. The card on the top, the SGC 6, sold for $813. The PSA copy sold for $1,351. I hope people aren't fast forwarding through this because it's starting to really get interesting here in the middle. $1,351. Does the card on the bottom look like it's $535 more valuable than the one on the top? I don't see that at all. Shipping is about the same, 50 cents more on the one on the top. Oh my. So the 56 tops Willie Mays, I again, for the third consecutive card, think the SGC was better. But the PSA copy sold for 66% above the cost of the SGC. $538. That is wild. That is crazy. I'm going long here. This is a long video, and it wasn't really intended to be, but I'm having fun doing this. The PSA averages are $1,050. The SGC averages are $921, according to VCP. What does VCP stand for? Vintage Card Prices. VintageCardPrices.com is their website. Recent sales, again, 912, 1195, 1351, 1156. Bottom 1250, 813. Again, it's kind of the PSA is continuing to sell for more. We're not looking at all of those cards, but we did just look at the one. All right. How about these two? Which of these would you rather have? Now, the color looks a little better on the left. Is that the image though? Because the white is really white. Almost looks fake white. Centering very similar. This one might be the hardest one for me so far. Which of those would I rather have? I don't know. Top to bottom centering is better right. Left to right centering is very similar, maybe a little better right. The color does look a little better on the left. Personally, I might go with the card on the right on this one. I I could coin flip this one. Very similar. Both beautiful cards. Look at the back though. There's a big looks like a grease drip mark there on the left. So now when I look at them, I'm definitely going with the card on the right. So before it was close, but the card on the left, that big splotch. Now again, I know it's on the back, so it doesn't really matter, but if I had to pick, because again, it's close to me, the tiebreaker, and you can almost see it looks like maybe it bled through. Look at right there, right in his armpit. It looks like that drip went all the way through. Yeah, because that would be on that side of the card, went on the back. So you can actually see it bleed through a little bit. So I'm definitely going with the card on the right. Again, both are beautiful cards, though. I'm taking the card on the right. You can kind of see it through. You can definitely see it on the back. So I'm going card right. Card right again is SGC. Okay. And it is a very recent grade. Look at that. That's a very new serial number. Last couple months, that was probably graded. The one on the left was graded by PSA in the last couple months. I'm taking the card on the right. So you'd think the card on the right would sell for more, right? It did. Sold for $397. Card on the left sold for $360. So that gives me a little sigh of relief there. Uh, it sold for, not quite 10% more, maybe right around 10% more. Again, both are great cards. $360 for the PSA 5, $397 for the SGC 5. 10% more for the SGC above the PSA price. And the averages, PSA 5 is averaging 371, SGC 5 is averaging 344. Some of the prices on here, recent sales of the SGC 397, 470, 375, those are good. That's a good sign. 3 of the last 4 sales of SGC 5s have been higher than the last 4 of PSA. Again, the trend, looking at that tells me a lot. That's a good sign for SGC values. Okay, let's look at these two. Two really nice cards. One of my favorite cards, 58 Topps Hank Aaron. Got a couple of little white marks on there. Got a couple of little fish eyes. Looks like maybe a fish eye under his cap there. Color is fantastic on the right. Centering is fantastic on both. Based on the color and the clarity, again, it could be the scan. So I would be looking at their websites. I would go to SGC's website. I would go to PSA's website. I would pull the cert number. I would look at the color there. But if I'm looking at these two, I'm leaning the card on the right. If you hate fish eyes, you might go card left, but it does look a little hazy. Backs look similar. I'm leaning right a little bit. Not a lot, a little bit. A little diamond cut on both. Okay, so the PSA is the one on the right. So I would think that the one on the right might sell for a little bit more. Not a particularly new serial number. This was a few years ago now. I'd say 5, 6 years ago that was probably graded. Sold for 305 versus 285. I think that's fair. I think that makes sense. I think that makes sense. A little bit more for the PSA copy because I think it's a little bit better of a card, at least according to the pictures. So that one PSA sold for more, about 7.2% more. Again, you can see SGC is sold for more twice. The Frank Robinson was clearly the better card, in my opinion. So that makes sense. But I do think there were the 54, 55, and 56. The SGC was better, but the PSA sold for more. A little concerning. The averages are right about the same. In fact, this is the first one we've seen where the average is higher for SGC. Again, when you look at these sales, 305, 405, 312. So pretty kind of dead even between those two. Last card. This time, instead of hiding the grade, I just decided to share it. I think I made my point there, but these two, I think I'd rather have the SGC. Centering's about the same. Color is maybe a little better on the right. Corners similar. I think I'd rather have the SGC on this one. Not a new grade on the PSA. There's the back. Similar. Definitely there's a bad scan on the left. So how'd they sell? Almost exactly the same. Almost exactly the same. So I think that makes sense because I think they're very, very similar cards. That top right corner on the one on the left is a little bit the concern mark. So I would probably have leaned right because the color's a little better, and then that top right hand corner. So, but again, very similar cards. Probably slightly prefer the SGC. The PSA slightly sold for more. Again, 0.6% difference, basically the same. Averages PSA 4.5, SGC 4.5, almost the same. The last four sales are really good for SGC, not so much for PSA. I got the $700 one, but the others are not that high, and then they're all high sixes or low sevens for the SGC. So what can we take of this? Again, that's the promo code. If you want to try VCP, I recommend it. Again, it helps me out a little bit, but if you don't, that's totally cool. I don't know why you wouldn't just try it for free for 14 days. It's got a great app. I showed you the website briefly. Check that out. I'll continue to talk about them a little bit because I think as we get closer to the national, it'd be good to have something to comp cards. Why not load it at least for that? Load up your collection if you want to, but I don't think that I saw anything there that crazy concerns me. I feel like the PSA premium is still there. I don't really feel like the PSA premium is growing. And I was afraid that the PSA premium would be growing right now as there's concerns about the life expectancy of SGC. So to me, if I'm an SGC fan, I kind of go, okay, that could have been worse. I do think there were 3 or 4 cards where the SGC card was clearly better, but the PSA card sold for more. But that's kind of always been the case. It doesn't feel like suddenly that lead is growing. I don't think it's shrinking, but I don't think it's growing. This was a long video. I thought this was going to take me about 30 minutes, but you guys know how I am. So again, promo code for VCP midlife cards, 14-day free trial. Um, uh, I am really interested in your takeaways. Did you see something in there that shows concern for SGC? Did you see something in there that makes you think PSA is clearly the way to go? I showed the data, but nothing knocked me over. Nothing blew me away as new information that is shocking. Let me know if you saw something otherwise. Really curious because I'm just set of eyes. I've got two eyes on this, but if a bunch of people watch this, you all might see something that I'm not really seeing, but I'm not seeing anything to get super alarmed by with this. But prove me wrong in the comments. Super curious to hear your thoughts for sure on this one.